In 2009, the entire G20 summit just came to this complete screeching halt.
Right, the massive tax haven dispute.
Yeah, exactly. You had Nicolas Sarkozy of France and Hu Jintao of China, and they were locked in this really intense public clash over international tax havens. And this is in front of, 18 other heads of state.
The stakes are just astronomical.
Oh, totally. And neither side was willing to budge an inch. I mean, the whole agreement was literally on the verge of collapsing. But then Barack Obama intervened.
And he didn't do it by shouting them down, right?
No, not at all. He didn't issue some mandate.
Hmm.
He quietly pulled Sarkozy aside. Then he pulled Hu Jintao aside. And by sort of navigating between them, he negotiated this tiny, almost invisible semantic shift.
Changing just one word.
Just one word. He changed the word recognize in the official document to the word note. And that single word resolved the whole impasse. The leaders came back to the table, and the historical agreement was signed. So today, we're taking a deep dive into the hidden architecture of how things actually get done.
Yeah, and that historical moment is actually straight from David Obstfeld's book, Getting New Things Done, and it just perfectly captures what we're unpacking today. Because, I mean, we often operate under this delusion that big initiatives succeed purely on the merit of a genius idea.
Right, like if the logic is flawless, everyone will just agree.
Exactly. We assume the world will just fall in line. But Obstfeld's research into networks, into brokerage, and this concept of assembling innovative action, it reveals a completely different reality. He breaks it all down into what he calls the BKAP model.
BKAP, right.
Yeah. Brokerage, knowledge articulation, and projects. And we're going to give you, the listener, a really practical toolkit for navigating your own networks using this model.
And setting the stage for this is so crucial right now because our fundamental relationship to work has just completely changed. Like researchers Luke Boltanski and Abe Chiapello, they observe that we have transitioned entirely into this project-oriented society.
Which is a huge shift.
Huge. We are no longer just, cogs in a predictable 20th century industrial machine where your job was pulling the exact same lever for 40 years.
Right, those days are gone.
Yeah, your career and honestly, even your personal life now is just this relentless series of flexible, temporary, ever-changing projects. You're constantly required to assemble totally disparate groups of people, hit a highly specific goal under extreme uncertainty, dissolve the group, and then just move to the next thing.
And if you don't understand the invisible mechanics of how to mobilize those disparate groups, you are basically going to spend your entire professional life feeling like you're hitting a brick wall.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, think about it. Have you ever tried to get a new project off the ground and just stalled out completely? That brilliant idea you have for like a new software feature or some community initiative, it will just sit there, completely inert.
Okay, let's unpack this. Getting a new project off the ground is less about being some solitary visionary and much more like trying to organize a massive dinner party where half the guests don't know each other and the other half speak completely different languages.
Oh, I like that. Or even like trying to power up a sprawling, highly complex electrical grid.
Right, where half the wires are severed.
Exactly, severed wires, and the components were built by completely different manufacturers using totally different voltages. The potential energy is massive, but nothing lights up until someone steps in to act as the conductive material.
The broker.
Right. And to understand how that power and information actually flow, we have to look at the guest list and the room's layout, basically the architecture of our social networks.
So where do we start with the architecture?
We start with the fundamental building block of social organization, which sociologist George Simmel identified over a century ago as the triad.
The triad. So moving beyond just a simple dyad like just two people interacting in isolation.
Precisely. Two people talking is just a relationship. But the moment you introduce a third person, the complexity and the potential for real social impact just explodes.
Because now you have dynamics.
Exactly. Because in a triad, coordination suddenly requires a broker, a person who stands between the two other parties. And the structure of those three-person or larger groups dictates what you can actually accomplish.
And Obstfeld breaks this down into two main types, right?
He does. First, you have open networks. These are characterized by what sociologists call structural holes.
Basically, those severed wires on the electrical grid.
Yeah. A broker is sitting between two people or maybe two departments that absolutely do not know each other.
So they are totally disconnected.
Right. And these open networks, they provide a massive knowledge advantage because these unconnected parties travel in completely different professional or social circles, so they possess novel, non-redundant information.
Which is where the spark of innovation usually comes from.
Exactly. And this is a big, but structural holes present a debilitating action problem.
Why is that?
Because it is notoriously difficult to mobilize disconnected people who don't share a common background, they don't have a shared vocabulary, and their incentives usually aren't aligned.
Which naturally leads us to the mirror image of this. Closed or dense networks. This is the tight-knit team where everyone knows everyone.
Right, the classic echo chamber.
Yeah, but the text points out that these structures actually offer a distinct action advantage. You have established trust, you have immense social support, and shared behavioral norms.
Which makes getting things done really easy.
Exactly. If you need to mobilize a dense network to execute a known task, it happens frictionlessly. But, as you hinted at, they suffer from a terminal knowledge problem. They act as echo chambers, constantly recycling the same redundant information.
So they rarely produce anything genuinely groundbreaking.
Right. But I have to push back on the modern consensus here, though, because in contemporary corporate culture, networking is basically exclusively treated as the ruthless expansion of your open networks.
Oh, yeah. Collect as many business cards as possible.
Exactly. It's all about collecting as many unconnected contacts as humanly possible to bridge those structural holes. So does this mean closed networks are unfairly villainized as these stagnant echo chambers, when in reality, they're the only places where the high bandwidth trust required to execute complex work actually exists?
That is a highly sophisticated read on the data. You're touching on a phenomenon researchers Sinan Errol and Marshall Van Alstyne call the diversity bandwidth trade-off.
The diversity bandwidth trade-off, okay.
Yeah, so the weak ties that make up those sprawling open networks, they are incredibly efficient for exchanging simple, low-stakes information, like basic industry news or maybe a tip about a job opening, but they completely fracture under the weight of complex knowledge.
So they don't have the structural integrity to support heavy, highly sensitive information.
Exactly. Without the strong ties found in closed, dense networks, you simply cannot transfer the rich, highly nuanced, and often contentious data required to build something new. The trust just isn't there.
So Master Organizer isn't just mindlessly collecting strangers on LinkedIn.
No, not at all. They're actively navigating the tension between the knowledge advantage of the open network and the action advantage of the closed network.
But just recognizing the structure of the network doesn't actually do anything if the broker just sits there statically, right? I mean, a structural hole is just empty space.
Right. The network is just the layout.
Yeah. So the real magic of the BKP model is the behavioral process of brokerage, how we actually act in these networks. And Obstfeld identifies 3 distinct behavioral orientations when you're standing in the middle of that triad.
Yeah, and the first one, the most common orientation, is conduit brokerage.
Conduit brokerage.
This is basically the act of recognizing valuable information in one isolated world and ferrying it across the boundary into another. But it requires far more than just copy-pasting an idea.
Right. It's not just forwarding an email. And the famous historical example from the text is Steve Jobs visiting Xerox PRC in the late 70s.
Such a classic story.
It really is.
Yeah.
So Jobs gets a tour of their facility, and he sees their graphical user interface and this clunky early version of a computer mouse that costs like $300 and breaks after 2 weeks of use. And he instantly recognizes the paradigm-shifting value of the idea.
But he doesn't just steal the blueprints and tell Apple to build a Xerox mouse.
No. He translates it for a totally different commercial ecosystem. He goes back to his Apple engineers and demands a mouse that costs $15, won't fail for years, and can smoothly operate on top of a Formica desk or like a pair of blue jeans.
Right, he acted as the conduit. He extracted the raw knowledge from World A and completely reformatted it so it could survive and actually scale in World B.
But bridging a gap assumes both sides ultimately benefit from the connection, right? What happens when the broker's power stems from keeping the 2 parties completely isolated?
That brings us to the second behavioral orientation, tertius gaudens. It's a Latin phrase meaning the third who enjoys.
Which, I gotta say, sounds a bit predatory.
Well, it often is. This behavior involves actively exploiting the distance, the unfamiliarity, or even the conflict between 2 parties. The broker extracts value specifically by preventing the structural hole from closing.
Yeah, the text outlines this wild scenario in the music industry to explain this. So there's this independent country music producer trying to land a deal for an unknown artist.
Okay.
He sets up a live showcase, and he invites the top executives from 3 rival record labels, including heavyweights like Century and Fantasy. But crucially, he does not introduce them to each other.
He keeps them separated.
Exactly. And instead, he secretly packs the venue with a truckload of rabid planted fans.
So he orchestrates this total illusion of massive demand.
Yes, the band plays, the planted crowd goes completely insane, and the label executives are just sitting there in their separate VIP sections watching their competitors react to the frenzy.
Oh, that's brilliant.
The producer intentionally leverages their isolation and their paranoia to trigger a bidding war, and he secures a lucrative deal that very night. He is the third who enjoys the benefit of their disconnection.
But it's important to note that Tertius Gaudens isn't exclusively a tool for corporate manipulation.
Right, there was that other example.
Yeah, the sociologist Sudhir Venkatesh documented this fascinating pro-social application in Chicago. So a local pastor learned that two rival gang members were escalating a dispute that was inevitably going to end in a shootout.
And the pastor didn't try to mediate between them immediately
Right.
because the tension was just too volatile.
Exactly. It would have been too dangerous. So instead, he reached out to the illegal gun brokers operating in that specific neighborhood.
He used his social capital to tell the gun brokers, do not sell weapons to these two specific individuals for the next 30 days.
Right. He intentionally manipulated the network to block the flow of resources. He exploited a structural gap to freeze the action.
And that forced pause created the necessary cooling off period to eventually bring the rivals to the table.
Which ultimately leads us to the third and really the most critical behavior for driving sustained innovation. Tertius Ungens, the third who joins.
The master skill for innovation.
Absolutely. This is the broker who purposefully forges new collaborative ties between isolated parties.
Which brings us right back to that 2009 G20 summit we talked about at the start. When Barack Obama pulled Sarkozy and Hu Jintao aside to negotiate that single word change from recognize to note, he wasn't just ferrying information like a conduit.
And he certainly wasn't exploiting their division like the music producer.
Right. And to be clear, we are just impartially reporting the historical example from the text here, not endorsing any political figures, but functionally, he was finding the microscopic sliver of common ground required to permanently close the structural hole between them.
What's fascinating here is that a truly socially skilled person, a truly effective Tertius Ungens broker, doesn't just close one hole and call it a day. They construct what Obstfeld calls Tertius chains.
Tertius chains, what does that look like?
It's a deliberate cascade of introductions. So you introduce person A to person B to solve, say, an immediate technical hurdle. But that new pairing suddenly alters the entire geometry of the network.
So it opens up new possibilities.
Exactly. It unlocks the ability to loop in person C, maybe an external financial partner, which fundamentally elevates the entire group's capacity for action. It's this chain reaction of collaboration that reshapes the organization from the inside out.
But introducing people is really only half the battle. Because if Obama brought Sarkozy and Hu Jintao back to the table, but they fundamentally lacked a shared conceptual framework to debate international tax law, the connection is utterly useless. The chain just breaks.
Right. The connection means nothing if they can't communicate.
Exactly. Which brings us to the K in the BKAP model. Knowledge articulation. How do brokers actually get people on the same page?
This is the invisible friction that derails most projects. Knowledge articulation is the grueling process of taking tacit knowledge, which is deeply embedded, automatic, unconscious expertise, kind of like riding a bike.
Stuff that resists easy codification.
Right. Taking that tacit knowledge and converting it into an explicit, usable state that outsiders can actually comprehend and act upon.
And the academic Paul Carlisle provides this brilliant framework for this called the 3 T's, right? Transfer, translation, and transformation.
Yes. Transfer is the easiest. That's just moving data between people who already share the exact same professional vocabulary.
Like two software engineers talking to each other.
Exactly. Translation requires more effort. You're adapting the message for a different audience, maybe a different department. But transformation, that is where projects live or die.
Because transformation isn't just about changing the words.
No, it's about resolving deep, entrenched conflicts of interest. You are asking someone to abandon their established mental models and fundamentally alter their behavior to accommodate a new reality.
And to understand how this psychological friction is actually overcome, the author highlights this incredible ethnographic study inside a major automotive company. They call it New Car in the book.
Right, a pseudonym for a real manufacturer.
Yeah. And the text outlines 5 communicative dimensions, but 3 of them really illustrate how brokers force this transformation.
The first one is the delicate balance of moving from complex to simple, while simultaneously shifting from the familiar to the defamiliar.
And there's this visceral hallway confrontation at New Car between two managers, Dan and Brad, that perfectly shows this. Brad is fiercely defending this antiquated paper car parts database just because it's what he knows.
It's his comfortable routine.
Exactly. But Dan desperately needs Brad to abandon it and adopt a new virtual car digital system to get their physical prototype built. And Dan realizes that the logical PowerPoint presentation just isn't going to pierce Brad's stubbornness.
No, Dan has to shatter Brad's existing paradigm. He has to defamiliarize him.
Right, so Dan looks at him and says, "We are not a car company. We shit out cars. We are an information company."
Wow.
Yeah. It's a jarring, totally crude metaphor, but it brilliantly disrupts Brad's routine. By stripping away the romance of automotive manufacturing, Dan forces Brad to see the raw digital data as the actual product they are building.
He transforms a highly complex logistical dispute into a violently simple, undeniable reality check.
Yes, and that reliance on imagery leads right into the second communicative dimension, the use of metaphor and analogy.
Oh, the story with Rick, the stylist.
Yes, so Rick is a lead stylist at New Car, and he possesses this highly tacit aesthetic vision for the tactile feel of a new armrest prototype.
It's all about the vibe.
Exactly. But the problem is he has to communicate this entirely subjective vibe to highly literal, data-driven manufacturing engineers. And you just cannot hand an engineer an equation for aesthetic emotion.
No, they won't know what to do with it.
So Rick touches the physical prototype during a meeting, and he tells the engineers that the plastic currently has a Barbie doll stipple and that it needs to be tight like a scuba outfit.
Which is so funny. The engineers actually immediately laugh when he says that.
They do. But the translation works flawlessly. Rick uses these universally understood cultural touchstones to convert his internal artistic instinct into a highly explicit design directive that the engineers can mathematically execute.
It bridges the gap between art and mathematics. It's perfect.
But the final dimension we should highlight is laying down markers. This is the strategic establishment of credibility. Ensuring the audience actually trusts the translation you're providing.
Establishing authority in the room.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting, and I kind of have to challenge you on this one. So the text recounts Dan walking into this highly hostile meeting where senior executives are actively resisting his new virtual car process.
They do not want to change.
No. So Dan aggressively shuts down the dissent by deploying incredibly dense engineering jargon. He rapid fires these acronyms about DVP and Rs and transitioning from APCN to CN, and he explicitly reminds the room, "I'm a product engineer. Been there, done that."
He essentially saturates the room in technical authority.
Right, but is that actually knowledge articulation? Or is laying down markers just a Machiavellian corporate manipulation tactic?
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like he's weaponizing jargon simply to sound intimidating and bulldoze the opposition.
That is a totally valid skepticism, and it certainly borders on aggressive corporate politics. But in the context of getting new things done, it is a profoundly necessary form of translation.
Oh, so?
Because every professional subculture operates on what the text calls privileged knowledge. If Dan walked into that room of veteran engineers and simply said, "Trust me, my disruptive new idea is better," he would be laughed out of the building.
Because he hasn't earned their respect.
Exactly. By strategically deploying their highly specific, esoteric jargon, he is proving that he deeply understands the gravity of the routines he's asking them to abandon. He is signaling, "I am not an arrogant outsider meddling with your livelihood. I am one of you, and I possess the technical foresight to safely navigate this transition."
Oh, I see. It neutralizes their defensive posture so the actual transformation can occur.
Precisely. It builds the trust required for the leap.
That reframes it completely. He has to validate their existing world before he earns the right to demand they change it. Okay, so we've mapped the network grid. We are actively joining people together as the tertius iungens, and we are articulating the knowledge to force transformation. What is all this effort actually producing?
This brings us to the final piece, the P in the BKAP model projects.
So we have the network, we have the shared language. What are we actually building?
The distinction here is existential. You are dedicating your energy to one of two things. You are either maintaining a routine or you are launching a creative project.
And routines are inherently past-oriented, right?
Yeah.
They are highly repetitive, established behavioral patterns.
Yeah, and their primary cognitive function is actually to conserve our mental effort.
It's the neurological equivalent of driving your morning commute on autopilot. You arrive at the office without actively remembering the last 20 minutes of the drive.
Exactly. Whereas creative projects are relentlessly future-oriented. They are non-routine, emergent, and completely plagued by uncertainty.
And the text uses the Apple Watch versus the iPhone upgrade to explain this. So an iPhone upgrade, despite being this massive global undertaking, is largely a routine. Apple has highly predictable steps, known manufacturing partners, and a rigid timeline.
But the original Apple Watch was a massive leap into the unknown.
It was a creative project.
Entirely unscripted. Apple had to bridge massive structural holes. They had to bring in external fashion designers, Swiss luxury watch experts, and specialized metallurgists who had never, ever worked within the consumer electronics ecosystem.
Right. Highly uncertain combinations of people.
It was a highly volatile combination of disparate resources, constantly iterating toward a completely unproven commercial goal.
And to truly capture the psychological chaos of operating inside a creative project like that, there is this incredible artifact from the new car ethnography. It's a hand-drawn picture titled The Train Picture.
Oh, I love the train picture.
Yeah. It's so visceral. Executives literally posted this drawing on their cubicle walls to explain their daily reality to outsiders. The drawing depicts this massive old-school steam engine barreling forward at top speed, billowing clouds of black smoke. But the train tracks end mere inches in front of the engine.
The visual of impending disaster.
Exactly. And directly in front of the moving wheels, there is a frantic crew of workers hammering down new steel tracks just fast enough to keep the train from derailing into the dirt.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that chaotic image perfectly articulates the fundamental reality of the learning curve.
What do you mean?
Well, we live in a society that reveres highly polished routines. We look at the algorithmic perfection of Amazon's global delivery network or the flawless assembly lines of modern tech giants, and we view them as these pristine feats of engineering.
Right, they look effortless.
But every single ultra-efficient routine we rely on today was born out of a deeply deliberative, incredibly messy, track-laying creative project. A project where some broker had to fight through the friction of transformation, connecting the right people and translating the right ideas just to get the very first piece of track laid down.
It is the unavoidable prerequisite to progress. So to synthesize this entire deep dive for you, if you want to get new things done, having a flawless blueprint is totally irrelevant if you don't understand the grid.
The structure matters most.
Yeah. You must actively operate as the Tertius Ayunjin's broker, seeking out structural holes and joining isolated worlds together. You have to endure the friction of knowledge articulation using targeted metaphors to avoid the Barbie doll stipple miscommunications.
And most importantly, you must be willing to live in the terrifying, high-stakes environment of laying tracks in front of a moving train before your idea ever has the luxury of becoming a comfortable routine.
It requires immense social stamina.
It really does, but it is the only mechanical process that actually turns an abstract idea into reality.
So, what does this all mean for you, navigating your own networks tomorrow morning? It brings me to a final, somewhat unsettling thought I want to leave you with. We started this deep dive by referencing Boltanski and Kipel's observation that we are entirely engulfed by a project-oriented society.
Right.
And we now understand that organizational routines exist specifically to conserve our mental effort. They are the cognitive autopilot that prevents our brains from short-circuiting.
They keep us sane, basically.
Exactly. But if our modern economic world is shifting to a structural model where everything, every quarter, every deliverable, every gig is a brand new, highly disruptive creative project,
Wow.
are we structurally designing a society that is biologically destined for chronic cognitive burnout?
Wow.
I mean, in our relentless systemic demand to always innovate, are we permanently losing the vital mental sanctuary of the routine?
It is a profound structural dilemma because if we are perpetually laying track in front of the moving steam engine, we never actually earn the right to just sit back in the passenger car and enjoy the ride.
It's a heavy reality to mull over the next time you find yourself trying to translate a complex vision to a room full of strangers. Keep laying those tracks. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.